Okay. Okay, take
You
it away.
have to give me, you have to give me the option
All
to.
right. Yeah. Mhm. Okay, try now. Oh, sorry, guys. Before we begin, let me introduce our jurors. We have Sarah Valente, who I think most of you know. Sarah has a great practice, Stereo Tank, and do awesome work, and a great critic, and happy to have her. Also a longtime resident of New York, so she understands the site fairly well, I think. David Rifkind, our resident theorist, who was here in the fall and gave us some great feedback. Recently interim chair of the landscape architecture department. David, we try to engage landscape and these spaces generically if we can, but a real historian, and happy to have you here, David. And then Mark Minak is joining us. Mark is a former colleague from Ohio State, where I first taught, and now is an associate professor at University of North Carolina in Charlotte. Previously taught at University of Arkansas in Fayetteville, and has a great practice called Silo R&D. I've shown you some of their work, and you guys should, take a look more. But thanks for joining us, Mark. He'll be here all day as well. He'll join us for the super jury. Oh, and Albert Elias is here. Albert, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Good morning, everyone.
Man. Great to see you. And yeah, Albert is an instructor at FIU, and hopefully more involved in my studio next year. He's been our roving critic, although I wasn't aware of it until recently. So anyway, thank you, Albert, and thank you, everyone, and go ahead. After lunch, we have another juror named Clay Odom from University of Texas joining us. Go ahead, Houghton.
You guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, hello, my name is Fatin Al-Musawi. So as Professor GELPI mentioned, our first assignment was to pick a precedent. My precedent was the Church of Our Lady of Miraculous Medal. So what's unique about this project was how he derived the form, these are his drawings, which show that he started with an asymmetrical umbrella, and then he tilted it up, pulling up the middle of the short side and then leaning it against another asymmetrical shell, which creates one bay of this church. So this element is then repeated and like scaled up to create the whole church, and it's more of like a roof structure. So from there, we were asked to create some type of transformation to this by adding our own elements to it, or like inspiration from it, to create our cube. So in the first 3 steps, I share with Candela the same step. And then from 4 to 7 are my additions. So I trimmed the edge and I mirrored it for me to be able to mirror it on the x-axis instead of the y-axis, which he does it on the y-axis. I did it on the x-axis to be able to create spaces in between. And then I did the same step that he did in step number 3, but and by lifting and dropping corners to create spaces for canopies and terraces in between, which is step 7, and to generate spaces basically. So these are the drawings of the cube, which actually exists in studio right now, and I did an animation so you guys can see it instead. So our first step was to take an element from this and project it on the site and use it on the site after we had built this cube. So that's what you'll see after.
Cool.
So we also had to pick the site location, like Professor GELPI mentioned, that we had to pick a site within the strip. So mine was the Hunters Point South Park, and in which I took the elevation from the cube that subdivided the site the most, or showed the most of the geometry that I created from the cube, and I projected it on the site. I tried to line it up with the street lines and then perpendicular to it here down the symmetry of the site itself. And then I placed a small cube here, which lines up with the edge of the street to interact with the context of the city. And then I added this cube here to line up with the ferry boats, basically, because there's a ferry terminal here, which I'll show in this slide. So the reason why I picked this site, which I found interesting, is that there were some overlapping programs with the program that we were proposing. So there was the playground, the basketball court, the dog run, and then there's also opposing things like the ferry terminal, which is unique to my site only. And so I wanted to see if I can merge those two things. So in terms of a hybrid, I defined a hybrid as a mixed character composed of mixed parts. So in the existing program, there's a playground, which I combined with the education center, which seems logical, but then I added a skate park to it as well, which you can see here. So the playground is existing, the skate park is my addition, and the education center is my addition to that. So I was trying to see if I can merge or transition those programs within my design. The park space as well is a hybrid in the sense of it's merged with the amphitheaters here. So there's surfaces that you have under and over, surfaces that become greenscape, and then under it become theaters and vice versa. And then the ferry boat is merged with the recreation center and the cafe here. So trying to see how to merge all these programs is what I thought would create interesting, like with the same geometry that I follow from Candela, or that I took from Candela, and create this like an integrated landscape that merges all these programs together somehow into like a hybrid kind of conditions, basically, and transition spaces in between. So
Yeah, about 2 minutes left, Fatin.
Okay, I'll show my video then. So this shows the program, basically what I was explaining. I have the education center on this side and the ferry boat here, the gym and the theaters in between. And this shows different layers of the project. So we have the surfaces. Here, before that was the frames and the scaffolding below. And then these are enclosures, the circulation. In here, I tried to highlight specific areas. So one was the skate park and showing it in like floor plan and section to show how it kind of folds up into the education center. And then the outdoor classroom that's adjacent to the education center, and it kind of dips down in the site. And then their waterfront seating / outdoor amphitheater area, where you can see as well in section here. This section runs through like the whole site, and it shows all the areas that I was talking about and how these surfaces start to become roof structures, but also surfaces that can be skated on and people can walk on, in a sense, in certain areas. So after this slide, it's going to be a song, so I won't be able to talk over quick. So just, that's going to be my walkthrough, basically. That's all.
That was great. Great work.
Thank you.
I like your scale figure with the mask on. That was cool.
Fitting for the times.
So, Mark, Sarah, Albert, and David, I really want to turn the time over to you. It's the first one. So, if you have questions about the format, whatever it is, go ahead. We can spend a little longer if we need until we get into that groove. Fatin, do you have like boards that you could now toggle to that we could kind of?
I have the same drawings like in the presentation, so I can go to any drawing you want to.
So maybe pick one, like an overview or rendering or something that you think is the best.
I have a general question for her. You talked about in the programming slide this idea of mixed character and mixed parts, and to me that's interesting in relationship to how the high par works. And so I'm wondering how you understood that in your project, and like how'd that work? How did you do mixed character with high par?
So like in this, I think it shows best. So and like if you see this surface here is like a high part that kind of folds into the ground here. So I was hoping that this this is the education center, right? So it kind of comes out from the education center and then becomes like a skate surface for the skate park. So that's how I kind of merged the two in between using a high part. That's how I tried to transition these spaces. So and then that's that juxtaposition of having a skate park that's usually skate parks are usually like below like bridges or stuff that's not necessarily like combined with education centers, but having those two merged like that was my idea from like the mixing those two programs and having that character. So you basically that this is a roof structure that like becomes a space under where inside the building it's like a classroom, but on top it's a skatable surface outside. So that's how I and it's a high bar. So that's how I kind of tried to merge those two. I don't know if that's a good example.
Well, I think like even in the precedents that Nick ran through at the beginning, what I like about the high par is it starts with very legible edges and it tries to, I guess, hybridize between those. And so to me, I guess what I'm looking at here, and it's great work. I'm just curious about how you define the characters and then how you define, like you just talked about a lot about the hybridization. And so I'm curious how you set up the legible moments in the project and then how you sort of set up the blending or the ruled surfaces between them.
Yeah.
As a design operation, which I think could be, that's a really interesting part of the conversation today.
Okay.
I have a question about the materials. Is everything that we're seeing as white, or are you, is that all using concrete?
Yes, I'm imagining it as concrete. Yes.
And then these frames that you have on the roof of this structure, is that steel? Is it wood?
Yeah, like wood, most probably glue lamp, probably because it's like large pieces. But like, yeah, it would be wood. I wanted to, especially because we were looking into the formwork and how like that just a juxtaposition between like wood creating concrete, like you have to lay out wood for you to be able to make the concrete, but then you remove the wood. So this had this idea that we were questioning. So I left some of the wood in there, even though, and then so yeah, like kind of, that's the two materials that I was using.
Got it. And my next question is, for this project, did you design the spaces from the inside out or the outside in?
Outside in.
Outside in. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because
I really enjoyed the presentation. I thought the way that you presented was very easy to understand, and the drawings are very nice. When you're doing the fly through, I was having a hard time understanding the outdoor spaces, I guess because I didn't fully understand the materials because everything's kind of white and then green. So maybe a little bit more showing which materials you're using would help me understand the landscape better. But the interior spaces, I thought I really enjoyed those a lot. I think those are really nice on the inside when you zoom into those perspectives, and you're getting these really amazing spaces, and the way the light is entering those spaces, I thought was really beautiful. So I really enjoyed the interior spaces a lot more than the outside. And I think maybe it's because I didn't fully understand the materiality of the surfaces, like where one starts and one ends. Maybe that was intentional, but definitely maybe a little bit of articulation on some of those surfaces would help me understand the project on the outside better.
Okay, definitely. I'll try to do that for sure.
Hi. I enjoyed the presentation quite a lot too. Thank you. I think it was it's great, and you have beautiful drawings. I'm wondering, I have a question about program. Maybe you can go to one of those aerial views that you have. Well, more than program is how you are approaching the site and how you're deciding where goes what. Maybe you can talk a little more about that and how the relationship with the streets are, because you're talking about some grid lines and guidelines that you're using from the city, but maybe now that we see the project kind of coming together, how those sight lines and moments are defining some spaces in the final design.
Okay, well, the main line that I tried to line up with the city is was this one here down this street, which you can see in this kind of pathway right here. But in term, and then the reason why I placed this towards the edge, which I actually had here at some point, and I moved it towards the edge, was so that it kind of interacted with the buildings here, the surrounding buildings there. It kind of creates this like corner edge, the same way as like New York kind of the context feel. So I thought this this building would interact with the city in that sense, and then this one interacts with the ferry loading area basically. So it's kind of oriented towards the water. So each orientation is different, mainly because of its conditions. It's like within the site, its own little conditions that they have. And then having the surfaces, like the grid lines is what like define my geometry to be, because like working from that flat plane, which also goes back to Elias's question, was that like I started with the lines from the site to start creating these surfaces. So that's where I started lifting the lines and merging them to the ground at certain points, or merging them to the buildings in certain points. And that kind of like unfolding is what created the geometries in the middle of those 2 points. So in terms of placement, that's how it started. Like I put the cube here and I put the cube there, and then I used the lines within the site like diagram, which is this one.
So Faten, just a clarification. You basically, that cube that you designed early in the early stages, it's kind of a module that then you're using to create interior spaces.
Yes.
And then adapting to the outside forms.
Yeah.
Okay. And you could place as many as you wanted to. Is that how kind of the premise was?
Yeah, you could, like, there was that part was kind of up to you. You could place the cube right on the site and like go from there, or you could just extrapolate from the cube and start, like, which you'll see in other projects. They might not place the cube, but they take some form from it. And then there's other people that put multiple cubes, and you'll see like in Annie's project next, like she had multiple cubes. And then for me, I put 2 cubes based on that idea, which I told you, which one is like the corner condition here, and then one is the ferry boat. And then but then I also didn't leave it with the whole frame of the cube just as is, like for the sorry, here. For the ferry like loading area, like I kind of cut the cube in half and I unfolded it, and so it became this area. And then for this, I removed elements of it to keep it more of like a frame, like rather than like a solid cube. So I just kind of took away elements of it and
So one of the things that I'm enjoying the most about your project is that real engagement between higher moments and lower moments and the folding. I think there's very beautiful transitions between one part and the other. And I think it's it's a quite successful project. You also have nice graphics. You explain it very well. I'm only wondering about something, and it's regarding sort of these guidelines that you use at the beginning. These major axes, right? As you show it in your diagram, it's creating like this very kind of focal point, right, in the middle of the site, and that's how things are kind of originating. But at the same time, that star or that focal point, if we see the project, it's only this pathway. So I wonder if that should have been more of an event moment, maybe just a focal point or a space or a form or a I guess. And then only just following with the guideline idea, and I like also how you're starting to mark the floor, right? I wonder if those guidelines could have been an aid for you to give a more to follow a more kind of a geometrical path in how you mark the floor, and how that is related also to the formwork of the structures you're creating. So I guess, my point is, in your final images is not very present, the formwork, right? That kind of existence of texture of wood that it's necessary to create for the creation of these structures. So maybe that connected with the floor patterns could kind of bring everything together somehow. But anyway, I enjoy your project quite a lot.
Thank you. That was helpful though. That makes sense. I actually, like, with the X, like I do see what you're saying. Like that point would be important, but I was also that when I did that diagram, I was just like extrapolating lines at that point. Like I wasn't really, and then later is when I started to design those. So those, like, maybe I wouldn't make those lines as prominent is what I'm saying. Like it shouldn't be in that drawing, but
Then let me ask David Rifkind, do you want to say anything about this one, David, before we go to the next?
I mean, I don't have much to add to what Sarah and everyone else and Albert and all were saying. I think it's a really good project. The one thing I would say going forward, Fatin, is that there is, everything has its internal logic, whether it's structure or program or site. And there are times in your project when it's almost like you're fighting the internal logic of something, like the simplicity of the shell structure is really not there anymore, right? What's left over are these kind of curving, complex surfaces, but the actual logic of the structure is no longer there, so that your whole project has to sort of hold itself together with a series of columns and another kind of diagonal struts, but it's sort of losing the logic of the surface structures. And likewise with the site, I think there's a couple of places where you've made really good moves, like I guess the northeast corner of the site, where you have the one cube that comes closest to the street and has this dialogue with the building across the way. I think this drawing here, this kind of axonometric, is much better than the plan diagram that you showed us, because here you're actually showing us the masses of the buildings around you. And so this speaks much more about how you're relating to the masses of the buildings across the street. But the thing about the site, I was going to say, is that for the most part, you're relating to Manhattan, and the project has much less relationship to where it is in Queens than it does to Manhattan. But I think that's the kind of thing that you could still, that it would improve with development. It's just a matter of sort of like, I don't know, sort of like ingesting the logic of the thing itself, the logic of the site, the logic of the structure. Yeah, and I think one other thing too, I just wanted to say in relation to material, I think Albert asked a question about material, and I think the project would look better if you had the materials of the nearby buildings rendered, because the thing about having your project all in that same kind of like, material less whiteness, having it the same color as these tofu blocks of the adjoining buildings doesn't necessarily make your project look great, but because the buildings around you are much more heterogeneous in their texture and their color, the whiteness of your project, I think, actually is quite elegant because the buildings around you are they're rectilinear, they're made out of glass, where they have that fake brick and stuff on them, whereas yours is much more, it's got this kind of extraordinary sculptural quality, and it's, all one color. And so I think your project would actually look much better if you rendered, if you had a perspective that rendered just the surfaces of the adjoining buildings. So if there's a way to do that, if there's a way to collage your building in front of what the real ones look like across the street, I think it would actually look really quite good. That, that monotone or that whatever, that simple material, whatever, the consistency of your project against what's happening behind it.
Yeah.
That's a great comment. And I'll just say, thank you, Fatin, and, great work all semester and all year. And to the jurors, I know, like, we could spend an hour talking about Fatin's project. There's so many aspects and layers, but I think we'll, just have to keep our comments, and hopefully over the course of the entire day, we'll get in everything we want to say. You'll see a lot of overlap in these projects. So anyway, thank you, Fatin. Great work.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, Aniliat, are you ready?
Yeah. Good morning.
Good morning. And Mark, I don't know what you're doing in Charlotte, but we've sort of asked all of our students, since we have to present this way, to do videos, and many of them are doing these things for the first time. I've been watching them all week. I'm kind of enjoying them. Back to the 90s. Okay, Annie, go ahead.